Welcome, everybody, to this very special edition of the Silver Screen Action Figure Podcast. This is your host, Andre Joseph of AJ Epics Productions. And today, instead of tackling the usual topics of vintage old toy lines based on films, I decided to kind of branch out into the Twitter sphere. And, I was looking for people within the toy industry, people who are also avid collectors, to come on this show and be able to bring in their experiences, their thoughts, even bring in some trivia that we may not know about. So, this particular individual that I brought on today is somebody that I've been following on Twitter for some time. As you probably know, we've talked a lot about a lot of different toy lines from Kenner / Hasbro, specifically the Batman line, Ghostbusters, and Bill and Ted recently. So there's obviously a lot more to that, and I know we've said in the past that we were not going to tackle Star Wars until later in the year with the release of Rise of Skywalker, but I figure let's just touch on it a little bit with my special guest today. So this fine gentleman, he reviews Star Wars movies as well as the toy line, all kinds of 80s toys and movies, anything that's pop culture, and he is referred to as THAT JUNKMAN. So I want to welcome everybody and welcome you.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's really good to be here.
Yeah, it's so fantastic to have you today. So we're going to talk about a number of topics, especially Star Wars. Having listened to your YouTube channel and seeing the number of episodes you've done so far, what would you say was like your earliest action figure memory?
Pretty far back. I had to be 5 or 6. And I don't know who remembers Zayre's out there, but I remember I can still see it in my head going to Zayre's with my grandparents and my grandma saying we could each get one figure. My brother wanted Obi-Wan, and I wanted Obi-Wan just because my brother wanted Obi-Wan. And I left there with, I'm drawing a blank. He got Obi-Wan, and I got Han Solo, which wasn't too bad either, which I probably really wanted more. I just wanted to complain that I wasn't getting the one he wanted.
I think for myself, it had to be just maybe 1987. So I'm really dating myself here. My parents would go and they would get the real Ghostbusters action figures. It was like a year after the cartoon first hit. And I hadn't seen the movie. I've only watched the cartoon very little at my grandmother's house. And I became obsessed with these things, and then getting the ghost, getting the slime, eventually the firehouse. That was like some of the fun times of my early childhood, was taking those toys, and every time I saw a new episode, I would actually start reenacting those episodes with those figures. Even if I didn't have the ghost from the episode, I'd still try to find some way around it. When it came to Star Wars, the funny thing about it is, Star Wars, I would say that as a child, I was probably more aware of it when everybody was phasing out of it. So we're talking about the late 1980s, and Spaceballs had just come out. Now, again, I had not seen Star Wars to this time, but I remember seeing that movie and loving it, not realizing it was a parody. And when I saw that scene with Mel Brooks, playing the Schwartz, and he brings out all the merchandise, he's got the action figures, like, I want to get those figures. And, of course, finding out later, George Lucas wouldn't allow him to make toys for it. So I guess that kind of, in turn, made me sort of get into Star Wars to an extent. And then it was my neighbor who he was moving a few years later, so he was getting rid of all his stuff, and he had a whole box of like the original episode 4 action figures and sold them off really cheap. He had the Darth Vader case and everything, and that was my start. That's when I started going to all the flea markets and toy fairs and going through the Toy Fair magazine and trying to find every figure I could get. Sometimes I look at with cheap prices, sometimes not so much, but those were some of the fun times, was just toy hunting with my dad and going to these places and finding these figures that nobody was touching, because this was the period after Return of the Jedi and we were far away from the prequels as we would know them. Now, a lot of what you focus on is primarily the toy lines that Kenner produced back in the 80s and early 90s. So, from all the episodes that you've done so far on your show, What do you think made Kenner so unique as a company with the successful track record they had for movie licensed action figures?
Well, I think they really thought out of the box for the time. You know, when they took Star Wars over, they scaled them down. Although they weren't the first one to scale them down, they were the first one that really had a big hit with it. There was a um, Robo line, and I can't remember the name. I'm drawing a blank on it. I did a video on it. But anyway, before that, you know, there were size $6 million man GI Joe 12-inch size. So that really changed um, the action figures where you could really play with them more. And then since Star Wars was such a success, they went over and kind of kept the basic size for their superpowers line. Uh, Real Ghostbusters might be a little taller, but they were still smaller than the 12-inch, where it was a lot easier to play with them than trying to play with those dolls, where you couldn't really have play sets, you couldn't really have ships. And with Star Wars being such a success, I mean, whatever they did probably would have been a big hit. But that just really, that Star Wars line being the scale was really changed and shaped the action figure lines for at least the 80s.
Yeah, and I believe that as it went along and George Lucas realized the power of the merchandising off of that first film, it seemed like that to some extent influenced his approach to Empire and Jedi in the sense that he started injecting all kinds of characters, even characters that weren't even integral to the plot, like Yak Face. You know, like you barely see the guy in the film, but then you make an action figure of him, and he's like the rarest toy to get. So it kind of like expanded on the imagination of what kind of possibilities there were if you wanted to take the movie and just expand on like different characters that you could put into these small sized toys, and then having the vehicles, having the play sets, just having more of like you said, just more playtime that you could do compared to a doll where there's limitations because of size and mobility, I guess to say.
Right, yeah. Because I remember my brother's a little older than me, and he had the Mego Star Trek and the Star Trek playset, but they were so big he couldn't do much with them playing that playset. But you couldn't never have ships. I mean, you couldn't even dream of putting them in a ship and having them pilot anything until they smalled them down.
Right, and I think Kenner was probably one of the first companies
Now,
where,
hold on.
yeah.
Let me interrupt you because I can feel bad when I say Micronauts was the line that first scaled them down. I just wanted to make sure I gave that shout out so nobody be screaming at me.
Yeah, yeah, I'm very aware of
It was bugging me that I couldn't remember the name of it.
I see. Okay. But yeah, Kenner, like I feel they may have been the first company when it came to play sets that it wasn't like before that. If you had play sets for different toy lines, they were usually like cardboard cutouts of the backs of buildings and like you said, like with Star Trek, I think like Mego probably did like the main deck of the Enterprise, but it was like very much just flimsy cardboard paper. But with Star Wars, it was a little more elaborate. Now you had like more plastic mobility with the Death Star and having like the Hoth play set. They would be small. It wasn't like you could do a whole lot with them, but there were like little functions that they would all have. So you had something more physical, not something that was so flimsy like a piece of paper.
Right. A lot of them in the '70s were mostly more than play sets, although they called them play sets, were more backdrops. It seemed like.
So, what kind of qualities do you think separate great movie licensed toys from bad ones? Because I know, like, we right now you're doing a series of episodes about trying to find like the worst toy lines, which I think is fantastic, by the way. And you definitely rate on all the right components: the likeness, the playability, how they were marketed. I guess explain for the viewers and our listeners those particular kind of qualities that you would find.
Well, looks. I know on my video series, I give a lot of rating to the looks, but honestly, back in the day, like I know the Star Wars figures don't really look like what you see in the movie. Some of them do. Some of them really really bad when you look at it. Like Greedo's wearing a green jumpsuit. But as a kid back then, you really didn't even. it didn't even dawn on you that they didn't look nothing like the movie. Um, but I think nowadays kids really, if you have a figure line nowadays based on a movie and they didn't get the likeness rights or they didn't care to get the likeness rights to them, kids today is gonna notice that a lot more than back then. Of course, we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have, we didn't see the movie on video. Now I got Star Wars toys, but I didn't see the movie again for, 5 years later probably. So it was really hard to compare. To me, Greedo looked like a green jumpsuit than he did in the film.
Yeah,
Did that answer you some?
that definitely answers my question. And actually, you bring a very good point, because even when I collected those old Star Wars figures, and mind you, I mean, this was when I was collecting them. This was around the early '90s when nobody was playing with them anymore. But there was still a sense of fun with the little plastic yellow tube that comes out of Luke's lightsaber. Even if the likenesses weren't exact, the essence of the movies were still there with those figures. I mean, look, Han Solo still had his outfit, and he came with a blaster. Darth Vader may have had a flimsy little plastic cape, but as long as you got the helmet right and you had his whole body look, who cared if he wasn't so big and muscular? Later with Power to Force, yeah, they improved on all those functions, but something felt missing from those figures. And I don't know if it was just maybe Luke looked too muscular, or maybe that it just got a little too carried away, like taking every little shot from the movie and trying to make it into a toy. Like, for example, um, Empire Strikes Back, you have a scene with Chewbacca in the snow, and then all of a sudden they have to make a Chewbacca with snow on his body. Like, it just, sometimes it got a little absurd as it went along. But those older figures, they just stuck to, like, okay, if somebody had a different costume in a different movie, they would make that figure, and that was that. They didn't get too crazy with that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look at Darth Vader. He was released in '78, and they didn't change him at all through the whole line. Well, they could easily give him a new saber, could have had him without a helmet or a helmet that comes off. They could have done a lot to, they could have milked one for every movie, but they just took the one from '78 and put it in a new package.
Yeah, and that was the thing too. They would always go back every now and then and change the cards whenever a new movie came out. Just recycle the same figure, no change to it. And that was good back then, because let's say if you didn't see the original movie, but then you may have loved Empire, you may have loved Jedi, there was still an opportunity to go and get those figures if you were missing them.
Yeah, I mean, and then just think of how many, what the last run off the top of my head, 90, 98, somewhere around there, and they were shipping them on cards. Some of those very first ones were still being shipped on the new Return of the Jedi card. So when you walked into a store, if you walked in a store in '78, you had 12 figures to pick from. But if you were walking in a store in '85, you could find 90 different figures at a store.
When you were a kid, what was your experience like with your parents to go and buy those figures in the store, specifically the Star Wars figures?
With my parents, not much. My grandparents, my grandma would spoil us, buy us whatever we want. So it seemed like every weekend. Um, my brother, like I said, was about 4 or 5 years older than me. So when Star Wars hit, I was turning 5, I think. So he was right at the right age of buying the toys, and I was more just, hey, if he's playing with them, I want to play with them. So every week he would want one, and if he got one, then I had to get one. So, and then by the time Empire came out, I was hitting the age where I was really getting into the toys myself, and then by the time Jedi came out, he was out of toys. So then it was like I was just buying them for myself. But about every other weekend, I would go to my grandparents' house, and we would end up at Kmart or somewhere like that, and I would have to get at least one.
What do you think was the most difficult figure to find back then?
I can't remember any figure. Only thing I remember difficult to find was, I guess in '80, '81, the Star Destroyer. I don't. They call it a playset, but it's not very. Doesn't look like a Star Destroyer. I don't know if you've seen it before,
I have.
but that was the only one at Christmas time that me and my brother both wanted one of us to have, and my parents or my grandparents, nobody could ever find. That's the only toy I remember we could never find at the store.
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of stayed away from a lot of the vehicles when I was collecting them in the 90s. I mean, I had a Millennium Falcon, and that was like a must to have. I have an X Wing. But then, like you said, like there were just some that were almost disappointing when you actually saw them. Like the Star Destroyer should have been more like the Falcon. It should have been like a big ship that you could take off from the top, and then you would have the deck, and you would have maybe a place for Darth Vader to communicate with the Emperor, but instead it was like it's like taking a piece of cheese but cutting it in half, and all you're getting is like this
Right.
little, it almost like could just be like a little capture ship. It's not even really much.
Yeah, and it had no walls on it, so you wouldn't even know it was a ship by just looking at it. You wasn't even sure what it was.
Yeah, and that seemed to be the case even with some of the play sets too. Because I mean, rather than doing like these elaborate things, not until like Jedi when they made the Endor set, which they later recycled for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. But you know the Dagobah set, the Hoth set, they were just these little small islands, and there wasn't a whole
Right.
lot you could do with them. And I mean that was the one thing about the Star Wars toys back then that I thought was just sort of a letdown.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the cost, but they did a lot of backdrop play sets. There's the Land of Jawa and a Hoth play set that uses the same exact base, just one has the Sandcrawler background, cardboard, and the Hoth one has it's the same base, but the backdrops they cardboard add. And they did that a couple of times. The Droid Factory in '78 was re-released in Jedi, just a different color, and it was part of Jabba's playset.
Hmm. Now, do you think there was a particular moment when the Star Wars craze just completely phased out, and that's where, like, when Power to Force and the droids and the Ewok cartoon figures came out, that they just were not flying off the shelves, and people just got tired of it?
Oh well, by '85, I mean you had Jedi in '83 with nothing planned coming out, and it was dying off there. The people that grew up, the kids that grew up watching Star Wars and Empire and Jedi were getting kind of out of that toy age. Um, and there was nothing really new excitement coming, so it kind of died out. You had He-Man taking over the marketplace, being the number one toy, and between '85 and '95, it was a really dead time for Star Wars.
Yeah, the even when I was collecting, at that time, the Power to Force figures seemed like they were the hardest ones to get anywhere, and then if you did find them,
Oh,
yeah, they were ridiculously expensive. I was fortunate to get the Han Solo and Carbonite or get the Emperor. But even like times where I've gone on eBay and thought about maybe getting the Lando in his outfit from Jedi or getting, the Ewoks I never bought, I just sort of like I step back and say, do I really need these? Because it just seems like they were just so desperate at that point to just find every little thing, even if they have to take, uh, a stormtrooper body and put Luke's head on it just to say, oh, it's Luke Skywalker in the first movie where he disguised himself as a stormtrooper. It seemed like at that point they were just getting so desperate to make sales, but people were just kind of getting tired out. And then recently, I think it was from your Twitter page where I started seeing more of the prototypes that we never got, and that kind of like really was mind blowing.
yeah, they were going to do an '85 line that was going to be more of an expanded universe. We would have actually got a Tarkin figure finally if they went ahead with that. But yeah, that's kind of how the Empire line was kind of dying out. But then you had Jedi hit, so they kind of brought the blood back into it with Jedi dying out and no new movies, not counting those little cartoons that most people didn't watch. You didn't really have that drive to do more, so that's why they canceled it in '85.
So now I want to turn my attention to the Indiana Jones action figures, especially the ones that Kenner made, because you did a whole video actually recently on the prototypes and the LJN Temple of Doom figures, which I thought was really cool. I still have to check out the one you did on the Kenner figures. But that was another one where I think after I sort of phased out of Star Wars, then I turned my attention to Indiana Jones, and same deal. Started going out trying to find those figures, and in some ways, I think they had better play sets and little things that really felt like this was part of the movie. But that line only had like two waves, and it really didn't fly off the shelves as well. So I guess I want to ask you, why do you think that particular line failed and never really reached, the heights to continue forth into the other movies?
Well, Indiana Jones has always failed in the toy aisle, and the Kenner failed with it, LJN failed with it, and Hasbro did it when the Crystal Skull came out, and they failed with it. And I think I did a whole video on why people don't buy Indiana Jones. I love that line. I had the Kenner ones when I was little. Like you said, the playsets are probably better than most of the Star Wars, and they were a lot harder to find in the '90s when I started trying to collect. They're a lot harder to find in Star Wars, but I think it just comes down to I did a video on this that kids rather play like they're Indiana Jones than play with Indiana Jones. Star Wars had ships and aliens and something you couldn't really play in your yard, but Indiana Jones, you just grab an old hat and run through the woods, and that's good enough. So they don't have the creatures and aliens. You're playing with Belloc, an old man in a suit action figure. I mean, they got some good ones, like the swordsman and stuff, but overall, it's nothing there for the imagination as much as like Star Wars or maybe just Ghostbusters superpowers does.
Yeah, I mean, I was almost excited when Kingdom of Crystal Skull had come out and Hasbro started making new figures, because it's like, okay, great, now they can make Temple of Doom, they can make Last Crusade, and I didn't really find myself drawn to buy them when I saw them in the stores, because I mean, the second that I looked at the indie figure, its likeness was just flat out horrible. I mean, it's just the heads were not well made, and next thing you know, they were down to the discount aisles and like the closeout store, and they just, I guess something didn't pop, and I don't know what it was, but something about like when Kenner did it, and you're absolutely right. Kids wanted to be Indiana Jones. They wanted to crack the whip. They want to run from doom balls and, do all that kind of crazy stuff. But the figures themselves, I think in the beginning Kenner did amazing stuff with it with Raiders, but later on when they were trying to like recapture that magic, something was missing. Something just felt like they were kind of doing a piss poor job with it, and this was before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull come out.
Yeah, the Hasbro ones. Well, the Hasbro ones came out the same year as Crystal Skull, maybe a few months before. But like you said, Indiana Jones was horrible, and they flooded the market with them. They did like five or six. I'm top of my head, probably five or six different Indiana Jones. You had an older Indiana Jones from Crystal Skull. You had a Raiders Indiana Jones, and you had Last Crusade Indiana, which normally looks about the same. Now, Temple of Doom might be look a little different if he's just wearing a shirt, but they were like six, seven different Indiana Jones figures, and they all looked horrible. Um, and it seemed like they were really thin. Seemed like their joints would pop off if you play with them too much, and I mean, the whole market was flooded with the Indiana Jones line, and like you said, they just looked horrible. Especially coming from Hasbro, you would think Hasbro would have done a better job of it.
Oh, without a doubt, coming off of Star Wars, that they would really go out of town and make this work, but something just
They should
happened.
have just did it. They should have just did. And that's the other thing. They flooded. They did Raiders, Temple. Well, they did Raiders, Last Crusade, a few Temple Dooms, Crystal Skull, and they released them all about the same time. Well, it was just too much. You couldn't, even if you wanted to collect them, it was hard to get them all unless you wanted to spend hundreds of dollars. Well, they should have maybe just the Crystal Skull kind of got the kids into it, and then 6 months after that movie's release, really do an Indiana Jones line instead of forcing them all out at one time.
Totally agree with that. I think they should have had a smaller line just to see how it would have sold out. And I don't know, do kids really want to go and buy a Shia LaBeouf action figure? I don't think so.
That's why I said they're not like superheroes and aliens and monsters and stuff. So they don't really have that much of a. I mean, German soldiers. I mean, how kids today? How many kids want to play with a Nazi?
That's a very good point. So then another topic I want to turn my attention to. So we've mostly been talking about Kenner, but I want to get your thoughts on LJN, since they were also kind of in the toy movie licensed toy business back in the 80s before they went out and just only focused on video games. And it seemed like for them, they just had this tendency to start a line and then just completely stop. And then years later, you would see all the prototypes, whether it's Dune or Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, V, which you mentioned recently, and one that I wish that they could have made. And they kept dropping the ball half the time. What do you think their problem was? Or what do you think of them as an industry back then?
I didn't really know. They were kind of like the bottom of the barrel toy line, and that's what I think they did. I think their job was just, hey, let's get this line, let's pay for this line, and let's just throw out what we can throw out there. If it sells, great. If it doesn't sell, I don't think there was any real passion in it. I mean, they did some. I know they did some ET that really did look good. They did a Dune line that was the Dune line was really horrible. Um, they did a lot of live rock and still like just trying to. And I actually like the Temple of Doom line. I think they don't look that great. The indie doesn't, but I think they did actually pretty good with the Temple of Doom. But there's only 3 figures, so that's kind of hard to screw up when you're not doing a full line. But a lot of their lines were limited like that, with hardly anything in a series, just a few. And like I said, I think they were just they wasn't as big as Mattel and Hasbro and Kenner, so they got a license. They probably just bought the license as cheap as they could, threw what out there and tried to make their money back, is what it seemed like. And they didn't really care if the line was good or the quality was good, as long as they made their money back. If not, they just throw it out there and then cancel it.
All right, so now we're going to fast forward to the late 1990s, and we're still actually going to get back into the Star Wars topic here. I want to talk about when The Phantom Menace came out, or when it was about to come out. So everybody remembers all the hype and hoopla surrounding that movie, with the trailer virtually breaking AOL at that time, like the most downloaded trailer ever, and all the merchandising and marketing tie-ins they did. And like everybody's hyped up for this movie. Everybody, how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. Everybody's gone crazy over this. Something didn't feel right when that movie was coming out. And the two things that didn't feel right, one was when you had the KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell doing like their promotion. They kind of were overdoing it in a way that felt a little weird. But then when it came to the Phantom Menace toys, I said to myself, because I was in high school at this time, and I was sort of slowing down in my toy collecting phase. I always had said that when those prequels got made, I was going to go back to toy collecting. And then the second that Hasbro started putting them out on the shelves, I saw how they were jacking up the prices like ridiculously crazy, and the figures just okay. Like I wanted to get a young Obi-Wan because that was like the cool thing to have, but I don't know if I really want a young Anakin Skywalker or this Jar Jar Binks guy. I don't even know who he is. And, so I collected a few of them, and then all of a sudden the movie came out, and obviously I was dumbfounded by it. So I guess what I want to ask here is what were your expectations back then for those figures before the movie came out?
Before the movie came out, the figures. Like I said, I was excited for it. I mean, I've been waiting 16 years to see the Phantom Menace, to see how Darth Vader became Darth Vader. Was kind of let down with the film, but the figures they matched pretty good with what Hasbro was doing with the time with Star Wars figures. But again, like the Indiana Jones line, if you go back and look at 1999, they flooded the market with, like you said, they were every character almost you could think of, no matter how small the role was, came out in that series one. So a lot of people were just picking up Darth Maul, just picking up, like you said, Obi-Wan, or the main characters. They really, I did a video on this too. Kenner, yeah, this time Hasbro owned Kenner,
Right.
and they were still releasing them under the Kenner name, but they flooded that market and they sold so horrible. It's not that they didn't sell; they sold good, but they made so many of them that there was no way they could. It was seen kind of as a failure because they made so many. And like I said, everybody was doing Star Wars. You had Taco Bell, you had Pizza Hut, I remember going to the gas station seeing plastic cups. Everywhere you went, everybody had their own Star Wars merchandise. Pepsi had cans, you had to collect all the cans, and it was just everybody had to collect something. So, especially and then after they saw that movie, after about a month after the hype wore off, and you were like, okay, that wasn't really what I wanted. And Hasbro was stuck with all these figures and actually closed Kenner down because of that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's right. And I did see that video that you did. And I mean, I feel like that's kind of happening now too, especially after Last Jedi, where, because Force Awakens seemed to draw up so much merchandise sales, they were going the same direction with that. And then, the same thing happened. They flooded the Targets, they flooded Walmart. And the next thing you know, everybody's complaining about the movie, or at least there's a split amongst the fans, and that kind of hurt the sales. But I think it wasn't just the movie itself. It was just the fact that there wasn't really anything appealing that was coming out of it. There were no really new characters that you said, okay, I want to get a Rose Tico toy, or I want to get Laura Dern's character. Like, there just wasn't anything out of that movie that you would be
Right.
all that excited to go out and get.
Well, you see, it was a perfect storm because, like you said, the new characters weren't interesting. And then the main characters, if you were a fan of Kylo Ren or Rey or Poe, they look, at least Kylo Ren looks just like the Kylo Ren you had in the Force Awakens line. So most kids or collectors say, I got this. Well, I'm going to buy a whole another one for, what, $13? When, okay, maybe he doesn't have his mask on, but Rey almost look the same. And then nobody really cared about the new characters. Even people like the movie really didn't care about Rose and DJ, and then they flooded the market with them. They didn't learn their lesson in '99, and they flooded the market with them, which is seems to be Hasbro's strategy lately. Is hey, let's throw out all we can on the launch day on Fourth Friday, and then make like LJN was doing. Let's just throw them out here, and make as much as we can, and go from it. But I said it was a perfect storm because not only you had a movie that divided the fans. You had characters that wasn't that great. I liked The Last Jedi, but a lot of the characters wasn't great. Wouldn't make me want to collect them. But also at this same time, you had probably one of the worst years for toy sales. At least movie action figure lines are down. Kids aren't buying toys as much, and you can't just sell to collectors. You need the kids also, and kids aren't buying movie toy lines, action figure lines, not like they used to anyway. So it was all that came together and hit right about the same time Last Jedi did. So you can see where it hurt the sales, and then just all that on top of it really hurt the sales.
Yeah, I want to definitely get back to that topic in a moment, but first I want to ask you, and I know it's very brief, and we kind of talked a little bit about it off the show, but you actually had a brief experience working for Hasbro for a time. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Like I told you, it was very brief. It was I was a retail merchandiser, 94, probably 95, somewhere around there for a year. But I've mentioned it before that I worked there, and people on Twitter and stuff. Oh man, you work for Hasbro, and I said, well, I was the lowest man on the pole. I couldn't get any lower in the company. Like I said, I did another video where I said I only met one other person that even worked for Hasbro when I was there, and that was my boss, and I see him every 3 or 4 months. My job was just in my local town to go to Kmart, Walmart, Toys R Us, uh, help them stock the shelf. I know Hasbro had Game of the Month back then. We had Toys R Us every month. We would change that out. It was a little end cap for the game, and I mean it's an interesting company to work for. I really enjoyed it, but it was just a part time little job like that. Which is kind of funny. My first week there, I got in trouble because I got on the internet, and this is '94. Before the internet was that big. Uh, and posted a case count of some Star Wars figures. Well, it had to be '95 then, because when the new Star Wars came out, and I got a call from my boss like within 2 or 3 hours of posting it on the message board saying, "Hey, they told me to fire you, but I was able to talk them into just giving you a warning." So it's just funny that back then, even in '94, '95, they were watching what people were talking about online. So I hear people say, well, they don't care what fans or they don't know what fans are saying about the toys. But believe me, if they were watching internet posts in '95 that closely, I'm sure they've listening now.
It's funny that you mentioned that too, because it started giving me flashes of right around the time when The Force Awakens was coming out. I don't even think the trailer had hit, but somebody went and leaked a photo of the prototypes for Finn and Rey and BB-8, and I think even Chewbacca, and then it got quickly pulled offline. But I still held on to the picture, so I can imagine whoever leaked that had to get their ass fired very quickly.
Yeah, I'm sure they did, and I know there was some. I think it was making Force Awakens or one of those. Somebody leaked some set photos that got in legal trouble for that. And I remember right before the Force Awakens came out, there was some figures hitting the stores, and they didn't supposed to put them out yet. Some guy walked into a Walmart or something and saw the figures on the aisle on the peg, took a picture of them, put it up on his Twitter, and Disney got mad and had him, did a copyright strike on him and made Twitter take down that photo. And that was just something he found at the store.
Well, that I didn't know about, but that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean that's you can't really blame somebody for that.
So, obviously Disney, at least after Force Awakens, it seemed like they had this Marvel type of strategy to have a new Star Wars movie every year. So you would get Rogue One the following year, then you got The Last Jedi, then last year we got Solo, and now we got, Rise of Skywalker. So I guess the obvious question here is: do you feel that with every movie and then having to put out more merchandise, do you think Disney is overexposing the Star Wars brand, and is that affecting the toy sales over time?
Like I said, I think if you make the toys something that people want, besides just again, I hate to always pick on Rose Tico, but that seems to be the one that's everywhere. Where it's not an interesting figure, even if you're a kid, even if you love the movie, just look at that figure. It's not a figure you want to rush out and get, especially a kid with only has a $10 in his pocket. That's not a figure he's going to want to pick up. So I think it's all about, hey, if you put something out there that's exciting, you that the collector is going to get it. Um, the kids are going to get it. I mean, I don't think they can overdo it. Well, they do overdo it when they. I'm not a big fan of this Force Friday when they really push too much out there, and then it's so much on the stores, it makes stores don't want to reorder when the new series comes out. I did a whole video on Hasbro's problems a couple of days ago. So, but I don't think you can oversaturate it, but it does take away. Star Wars always had an event feel to it where a new movie would come out and you would feel like that was the event. And you had one every 3 years, and then you would pause almost 10, 15 years for another one. That, I think, kind of felt like it was going away. And I don't know, I would have loved to see two movies a year, but also I like that hype of waiting a couple years in between films.
I totally agree with that. Just I am also that kind of person that, give me a little time to breathe before you get to the next movie. And now it just seems like, well, we're just keeping to have to pump them out every now and then, or even now, having to constantly go back to the old movies and try to find a way to reissue a whole new set of figures. But of course, what got me excited recently were these new retro figures that they've brought out. So going back and remaking the original 1977-78 Kenner toys, but now injecting new characters that we never got back then. So now we got a Tarkin figure, which I'm actually waiting for in the mail right now. Do you think that these new figures are increasing or decreasing the value of the originals?
No, I did a whole video on it because that was a big question. In '95, Hasbro did the same thing with a 4 pack that had Vader, Han, Luke, and Chewie in it. And I heard then, and back then in '95, all the ships they had was the molds from the vintage line. So I knew collectors in '95 that were selling off their ships and playsets, thinking, "Hey, Kenner's finna re-release all this stuff with better sounds, but the same old. So why would anybody buy the old stuff?" But and it didn't hit then. It didn't hurt then. I don't think it's going to hurt now. I mean, this new line is so limited. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can't find them. It's aggravating that I can't. I found 3 of them, and being they're only at Target, or at least Target right now, that's going to keep them limited. Uh, but I think still, when it comes to the old stuff, people want the old stuff just because most people, not all, but because there's a factor there that you grew up with it. That's what you played with as a kid. And even if Kenner re-releases a Han Solo that looks close to it, something about having that original figure that, hey, this is what I played with, outweighs these re-release figures.
It's funny that you mentioned the frustration of trying to find them, because I've been to maybe 3 or 4 different Targets in Staten Island, in Brooklyn, and in New Jersey. I can't find them anywhere. I even took your advice about going into like the Father's Day aisle in the men's clothing section, and they're not even there either. So, it seems like these days to find even the ones that you really want, it's like you have to go on eBay, you have to go on Amazon, you have to go on any site that's selling them and the seller's legit. So, the next question I have for you is, do you think that compared to going to the toy fairs or the flea markets or even going to a Toys R Us when it was still open, do you think that eBay and Amazon and all the other websites on the internet have taken the fun out of toy hunting?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, like you said, you started collecting old stuff in the late 80s, early 90s. About 92, 93, when I started going back into getting the vintage stuff. And that was a really good age because you had a lot of kids growing up on Star Wars that were moving out to college, and parents were throwing their Star Wars stuff out in toy and yard sales. So you could really find stuff. Now you're not going to find anything, and if somebody has Star Wars anything in their house, they're going to throw it up on eBay and Craigslist, and they think just because it's Star Wars that it's worth $100. I saw on Craigslist the other day. It was a Star Wars storybook from '77, which is maybe worth $5. This one was in bad shape, and the guy put $100 on it just because I'm sure he found it in his attic and it had Star Wars on it, so he thought he hit the gold mine. But a lot of the fun, I had a lot of fun. In the '90s, I would drive hours, 2 or 3 hours to get to a toy show, try to hunt the toys. Um, I would hit local comic book stores and try to find stuff and build a relationship with other collectors. We would talk on the internet, but we would swap things and swap advice. But now it's just like, hey, if I want something, 90% of the time you can go on eBay and just, if you got the money, you can just go in there and buy it. So to me, half of the fun was the hunt, the tracking them down. And I had a checklist of all the vintage figures I would go through, try to buy them. And, they were hard to track down. I don't think I got any at the time off eBay. I got some out of, I did order some offline for people that was trading them back and forth, but most of my figures loose was found hunting on, going to comic book stores, going to yard sales, going to toy shows, and to me that was always half the fun, or most of the fun was tracking them down.
Yeah, those are the days that I absolutely miss. I mean, I remember one time being in Maryland. We were actually on vacation in Ocean City. On the way back, we stopped in a antique store. This old lady, she has like an original Luke Skywalker figure and a couple of other like some Jedi toys. She didn't know what she had, and she like literally sold us this whole set for like under $10. I mean, you know,
Mm.
stuff that you could easily get obviously for a lot more, but she just sort of gave them away. We're talking about 93, 94. So yeah, there was always that excitement, and going back, and you would have like the little booklets that would show all the figures displayed and checking off each one that you get, each one that you're still trying to look for. There was a lot of fun in that you just don't have now, because all you have to do is just type in a search, click on the button. Like you said, if you got the money or you got PayPal, it's right there, and you just got to wait for it in the mail. And it really is, I think, just going to the store in general is just becoming like a lost art. And now, because first it was, Lionel Kitty City, then it was KB, and now Toys R Us is gone, with the slim possibility of it coming back. We don't know as of this podcast. But with these stores going out and just the whole toy industry just becoming more regulated to the internet and maybe just a specialty aisle in a Target or a Walmart, do you think that the industry of action figures is becoming more of a specialty novelty for adult collectors and not so much for today's kids?
Yeah, like I said, I know the sales are down, especially with kids. Kids are moving on. They've got their iPad, they got the internet, they got video games they're more into now than ever. So I don't really see. I mean, there'll probably always be an action figure line, but the way we knew it growing up, even in the '90s, I think that them days are gone or slowly going away. I mean, when I grew up on Star Wars, I don't know any kid, at least any boy my age, that didn't have at least a shoebox full of Star Wars toys. And I got a son now that's 13, but even him growing up, he had Star Wars toys because most of them was '90s stuff. I quit playing. I gave him, but his friends never had a whole complete set of Star Wars figures or action figures. Kids might have one or two action figures, but I don't see them buying and collecting online. And one thing back in the '80s and probably the '90s is you had the big summer movie. You had maybe two big summer movies come out in a toy line with them, and kids would be excited and would buy that whole line. But now you got a movie comes out in December, and then what? 3, 4 months later, you got a Marvel movie that's coming out, and then 3 months later, you got a DC movie coming out, and then 3 months later, you got another movie. So you can't hardly even collect a whole line if you're a kid because by the time with Star Wars, you had 3 years. That's all you wanted was Star Wars stuff. Maybe a few other things here and there, but you could focus on just Star Wars. Now movies come and go and forgotten about within 3 months.
Right, and then you have like in the stores just too many options and more expenses for things that you want to collect in whole sets, which I guess is also very taxing for your parents' wallets if you were collecting now.
Yeah, and if you're a kid, if you got a kid and they say, "Let's go get you a present," you can get this little action figure that you can play with, for a couple hours, or you can get this game and you and your friends can go online and y'all can play it all night. They're gonna beat that game.
What are your hopes for episode 9? And also, even though it hasn't been made yet, do you have any hopes for the fifth Indiana Jones movie if it happens?
Oh, Indiana Jones is a tough one. 'Cause I love Indiana Jones and Crystal Skull. I don't hate, but when you look at it as an Indiana Jones movie, that's when you don't like it as much. And with Harrison Ford getting older, you start wondering how they're going to limit his part, and they keep pushing the release date back. So you're thinking, okay, now he's going to be what in his 80s.
Hmm.
I still have hope, being that I hate to talk bad about Lucas, but now that Spielberg's back and they kind of got Lucas out of the way, which Lucas does some really good stuff, but when you start breaking down the prequels and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and you start seeing a lot of the stuff that you don't like about it was at the hand of Lucas, it gives me some hope that Spielberg can kind of do a movie that he wants to do. Because what I've heard Spielberg say that he wasn't even happy with the Crystal Skull script. I can't talk. Crystal Skull script. That's hard to say. That he didn't like it, but he even says that, hey, my friend wanted to make this. This is the movie my friend Lucas wanted to make, so we made it. And you can tell he wasn't too happy with it. I don't think Ford was too happy with it. So I'm hoping they could at least go out uh, in style. And I don't think they're in a rush to get something out there just to get it out there. So I think I have hopes for it being under Disney. I'm not one of the Disney Lucasfilm bashers, so I have hope that it's going to be good. And they'll take their time with it. They won't rush it. And then with episode 9, I don't really have much hope for it. I like the movies they've been doing. I just hope it's. I kind of want to go in not with too much hope because I think that lets people down with all their theories and everything going in. So I'm just kind of just taking it easy. I don't read spoilers. I don't know much about it. So hopefully I can just go in with a clean slate and it will be a satisfying ending to the Star Wars saga, the Skywalker saga. The only thing I hope they do good is it seems with Force Awakens or this new era, they had this let's forget the prequels. I'm not a big fan of the prequels either, but I hope they find a way to bridge the prequels in this last movie so it feels like one big long story.
Yeah, totally agree on both points. And, especially when it comes to episode 9, which I'll talk about later this year when it comes out. My hope is that they're not trying to subtly pander to the fans because of whatever backlash there was The Last Jedi, but that they have a solid conclusion to all these 9 films, the way it's all built up to this point. The last thing you want to do is to suddenly let people down for the sake of starting a new trilogy and, wherever that goes from there.
Right. Yeah.
One other question I also have too is the Super 7 reaction line. What are your thoughts on that? Because personally, for me, I was actually pretty excited when that first started because it allowed for a lot of the movies I grew up with that never had toy lines to finally come to life and be in the form of the Star Wars molds.
I liked them when they first came out. I got a couple. I got Terminator. I got Escape from New York, and like you said, I loved that they were doing these old figure looks that we never got. I think again, like a lot of toy companies we talked about here, they flooded the market with them. They started doing a lot of. I know they did Firefly, and I think they did Charmed. So they just started doing '90s TV shows, started doing kind of newer movies. Um, I think that took away. I mean, what you want is you want the. I know they did Pulp Fiction, which I got, but if they stuck with that '80s line, I think it would have been a little better. You know, that the stuff we wanted as a kid and didn't have. And the price point was about $10, and that's just, most of the ones I got, I end up getting on clearance because they were $5. And $5 or $6 is okay because you got most people's not going to take them out of the package. They just want them because they have that retro package look, that Kenner style to them. So I think $10 was kind of pushing people. It's hard to buy a whole set of figures when you got 6 figures for $10 each. When you can buy for $10, you can buy a newer figure that looks a lot better, from like a new Star Wars movie or something. So I think if they kept the prices more about $5 to $6 somewhere on that low end, I think people would have got them more.
Yeah, because I know like when the Back to the Future figures were announced, I said that's the first one that I'm getting because of any movie I ever grew up with, that was the only one that I actually wanted figures for, and was so excited when I got them. But I made the mistake of buying them online and buying them in a four set because I didn't think that they were going to be sold in Toys R Us or FYE or any of these places. And like you said, they should have just stuck to those 80s movies and that probably would have kept things going rather than to get into 90s stuff or even like current things like Breaking Bad. And I think they had done a toy line for the movie Tomorrowland with George Clooney, which flat out bombed. Recently it seems like they're kind of like pulling back on all that and trying to go back to the essence of it, so they're doing more alien figures. They just announced figures for RoboCop and Rocky 4 of all movies, and They Live, which I'm definitely going to go and pick up. But yeah, Junkman, I really appreciate you coming on the show today and talking Star Wars and talking vintage movie licensed toys. Please, before you go, plug all your stuff, plug your website, plug your Twitter.
Well, I'll just say you can just go to that junkman.com there. That'll link to my YouTube. And I got 2 Twitters, Junkman, that Junkman. And if you just want to see toy stuff, that Junkman is more about anything. I also run on Twitter Kenner Toys, which is pretty easy to find. But you can go to that junkman.com and all the links are right there.
Fantastic, man. And I hope you can come back because I got a lot of different topics and some specialty ones that I know some of my friends probably wouldn't have the experience to discuss, but I know you definitely do. And I'm going to continue to follow your YouTube channel and your Twitter because, I mean, there's always something new to learn through your experiences and what you know about these toy lines in general. So, again, I thank you so much for this.
Okay. And like if anybody wants to check out my channel, I just like to say that there's a lot of toy channels out there, and before I make a video, I always search. And if somebody's already done the topic, I usually don't do it. So if you're thinking, oh, here's another toy guy, I hope you can find something different on my channel than you won't find on the other toy channels.
Absolutely, man. And then for everybody else, please follow us on Facebook, the Silver Screen Action Figure Podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Silver Screen AF1. And if you have questions or suggestions for future episodes, email me, silverscreenafpodcast@gmail.com. So that's it for the show today, guys, and I will see you at the movies.